Okay, so this section is all about tessellations and tessellations in or of a plane. So basically, think tile pattern on your floor. That's a good example of a tessellation. It fills the plane with repetitions of the same figure or figures, and a tile will not have gaps or overlays or overlapping. So that's what we mean by a tessellation. So what we want to look at, and I have this book that I wanted to show you all to give you some ideas of what we mean by some tessellations. So if you'll notice, we can have geometric shapes like all of these triangles that have been tessellated. Or in this case, whether you look at the black or the light figure, it's a quadrilateral of 4 shapes. Or here we have a tessellation of pentagons. But you can also change other shapes. We still have polygons in each of these. And this one's really interesting because it gives the illusion of circles, but actually they're all polygons. So you can do a lot of tessellations. We're going to start with some basic tessellations, and then I'll show you some more advanced, such as it doesn't have to be a polygon. And then Escher, M.C. Escher, is a famous mathematician who, with his tessellations, depending on what you focus on, you can see different shapes. So in this one, if you focus on the light, you see like a dove. And if you focus on the black, you also see a bird that looks like it's coming in for a landing. So the white one looks like it's in flight, and the dark one looks like it's coming in for landing. So they're pretty fascinating, but I wanted to show you a few of those. So let's take a look at what we mean by tessellations. Okay. So there's only a few regular polygons which will tessellate. And if we take a look at the polygons which will tessellate, polygons which tessellate. And what we want to think of are some of the regular polygons, and we're talking about a plane. So we're talking about a flat surface. Regular polygons that tessellate have angles, they're interior angles. I'm going to change this to regular. Regular polygons that tessellate have an interior angle measure which is a factor of 360 degrees. Because when the vertices get together and they all form and they all touch in one space, they will make a circle. Now I know sometimes you may think, okay, a soccer ball is a tessellation, which is true, but it is not on a flat plane surface. So because it has the bend in the ball, that allows for the other space to be filled in. So a tessellation needs to be on a plane, okay? And it can be formed by taking any shape, not just a polygon, and performing the various transformations on them. So what we do is use the transformations that we've learned to create the tessellations. Well, what are the transformations that we've learned? We've learned to rotate. We've learned to reflect. And we've also learned to translate, or to slide, or glide. Okay? So a simple one that I can do here on the board for you today before I show you some other examples are, imagine you start with a very simple shape like a square or a rectangle. Well, if I imagine sliding this or translating it, I could keep this pattern going. I could keep it going horizontally. I could slide or even rotate a square. I could also reflect this square, and so ultimately I could fill in this entire board with squares by gliding or translating, by reflecting vertically or horizontally, or by doing a 90-degree rotation. And so you can take some of these basic polygons. Let's say we take a triangle and reflect the triangle over the x-axis. In other words, reflect it down. So we could end up creating this polygon. This tessellation. We could rotate it, and we could keep this pattern going by doing some rotations. Okay? So the tessellation would fill up the entire plane. Okay, so what I actually want to show you, and what I was really excited to show you in class, are examples of tessellations I did when I taught junior high, because these are things that you can do with your students that are fun for them, and everybody has their unique tessellation. Remember, we're looking at rotations, reflections, and glides or translations. So one of the ways I started with them was I started with helping them get set up. So I help them with various ways to get started. You can give them dot paper. I'm not sure if you can see this. This is triangular dot paper. Or you can give them rectangular dot paper. Or you can give them grid paper. Okay? You can also supply them with pentagonal paper. What else have I got here? I've got more triangles. I've got more pentagons without dots. Sometimes it's difficult for them to see. Actually, these are hexagons. I apologize. Hexagons and hexagons. So you'll notice we have our three shapes. We have our triangle, equilateral triangle. We have a square, whether it's in dot paper or graph paper. And we have a hexagon, because these interior angles are all factors of 360. So I'm going to write that down again and take a look at this. Now I want to show you how I started my classes, having them create some tessellations. All right. So again, what have we got? We've got the equilateral triangle. I'm going to switch pens. That one's pretty worn out. Whose interior angle measure is 60 degrees. Then we would also have a regular quadrilateral, which is a square, whose interior angle, each measure 360 divided by the four sides, or four angles, so we get 90 degrees, which is also a factor of 360. And we have a regular hexagon. Hexagon has 6 sides, 6 angles, so the interior angle of each one of these would be 360 divided by the 6 vertices, not 360, I apologize. Okay. Remember to find the interior angle. Just to refresh your memory from a couple of sections back of a regular polygon. take the number of sides minus 2 times 180, because that's how many triangles we can make, and divide it by n. So that's how we came up with that. So what I want to do now is show you what I did with my students. I gave them basically a grid, okay? So this is one I printed off the internet just to make it easier to see. But the one I actually gave them is this one that's hand done with about 1-inch squares. And what I did was I had my students take and make any diagram, any shape, any drawing they wanted. So I went back through my files, and sure enough, I found some of the things we had done. So here's one that I had done. You'll notice that these shapes, I did my initials, I did some hearts, W, just various shapes, and I want to show you what ended up happening. So what you do is you take that grid paper, if you lay a piece of blank paper over it, the students will be able to see where all of these corners, all of these vertices of these squares are. So the first thing they do is they go through and they dot all these corners. So they're making their own dot paper. And of course, you can also supply them with dot paper. Then what I had them do is after they chose a particular drawing, and we did several that they could play with, they took, and let me see, here's one. If I take this shape that's in green that really doesn't look like much, and I put my dot paper over it, what I had them do was trace this tessellation over and over and over again. And so if you see, if I do that right now, and I come up, and I'm doing this kind of quickly because I want to show you, and I come back around, whoops, I missed that one a little bit, you end up with this shape. Well, if you do that over and over and over, and then you allow them to color it in, you'll notice that they ended up producing a tessellation that looks, well, not sure what you see. Some people see a shark in the waves, but they get creative. And then I had them go in and draw and color in however they wanted to. So that was one. Another one that was fun for them to do, and again, I did these with my junior high classes, is I had them take their initials. So you'll notice I have my initials in here. I guess I have the year I did this also. And if I take my initials, I chose to go over them in light green, dark green, light green, dark green, and then I chose to reflect them. So instead of the translation, this time I've just reflected my initials, and you end up with an interesting pattern. I'm trying to think if I have, oh, here's another one. On another occasion, same idea. Start with our dot paper, make a shape in that paper, and I just did this little, I don't know, I saw a mouse. I just did this little shape right here and copied it over and over, so you can see by tracing it, laying it on top and tracing it, I've got this little tessellation of mice, or what I saw as mice. And this is just a translation or a glide, because I did not reflect them or rotate. But when we got done, then I took and shaded them in, and you can see that it looks kind of like a whole bunch of mice that are right next to each other. So it's a fun activity to do. It's an art activity. It also shows how the same pattern is just carried across the paper. So that's fun. So I actually have just some examples. Oh, where is that one? Sorry, I have a file here. Here it is. This one right here on the right which I just did some squiggles, and then I noticed if I added bubbles, it looked kind of like some fish. So as an example, I then traced all of them, and once again, this time you'll notice I did a translation on the first line, and then on the second line, I offset it by doing a diagonal translation, and it's just lining up the corners on the dots. You may or may not be able to see, but each one has a little dot that I was then able to line it up, showing them how to trace by taping everything to a window on a sunny day, or if they have a glass tabletop and shining a light from underneath. So it's just a fun activity. So then the students, as we went along, asked about rotations. And I showed them, well, yes, you could take a shape. So I took one shape, kind of like a hummingbird, and you'll notice it's been rotated. Each one has rotated about 120 degrees, so I have 3 of them on a sample sheet of paper. There's the same 3. And then when I started a tessellation to demonstrate, you have the original 3, and then you have the next set of 3, and the next set of 3, and this will tessellate continuously across the paper. So you can also do a rotational transformation to show the tessellation idea. Okay. Now, some students are very, very artistic. Other students are a little more artistically challenged, but just showing some samples of even when they just don't know what shape to make, by simply changing colors, you've changed that nice tessellation. And so Kim had chosen colors in a certain pattern, and you'll notice that she started here with the purple in the middle, and then she sort of reflected off of that her colors. So every other row is orange, purple, orange, and then she decided to alternate the greens and the yellows. And just by simply changing the colors, her tessellation ends up being a nice pattern. Similarly, one of my students, Heather, she did the same idea, and she chose, when they paired up, she chose to go diagonally with a different color. Okay, so the idea is still there. She did a great job of showing how it goes over and over. Various samples here. Let's see. And then Jose chose to tessellate over and over, and then when he got done, he colored it in. And from your perspective, you might see just the red and the green, but if you stand back, you might see almost these corners of red and green. So it gives a little bit of an optical illusion. And I want to show you something else that's super fun to do with students. So as we moved through the year, when we did some tessellations, we then got a little bit creative. And the easiest way, I should have grabbed a different color. This is a piece of 4x4. Here, I'll help this out a little bit. It's actually a 4x4 square, but I'm using the Post-it to give you the idea. But the idea is, if you take the square, and the students can draw or cut anything, so if I just make some sort of pattern and cut it out, to do the tessellation, which right now, let's see, do I have a background to put this on? Wow. Here's a towel. That might help a little bit. So you can see I have this square and I cut out this shape. Then what you have the students do for the first time is just take that shape, translate it to the back, and tape it down. And this will become their shape for a tessellation. And then they might turn this into a fish. They could turn it into a car. They could take and rotate this up here. And now you're going to be doing a rotational tessellation as they cover them. And perhaps you see a person kind of dancing, whatever your imagination, wherever it takes you. So we did some of these in my class. And to give you an idea, I remember we started with a square that we cut. So again, if I start with the shape of this square, okay, then or a note card, you can use a note card, traced it, cut it, so it turns into this sort of template. And then by tracing the template over and over and over again, you end up with this particular picture, which then the student noticed looked like a bunch of puppy dogs. And so by coloring in the puppy dogs, you know, they turn this in. I can see that they've clearly done their tessellation very well. Then what ends up happening is that they went home and they were allowed to expand on that. And so they came back with this drawing of puppy dogs over and over and over. So it's quite fun. So I thought I would show you some of these because it's a fun activity to do with some of the students. Sometimes their drawings get very intricate. So for example, you can see this card that was cut and taped, right? And once this was traced, which took him quite a while, traced it and decided to call it Eternal Flames. So he was able to take this shape, which looks like it goes this way, right here. And then it just fit in by a slide transformation. And by this translation, just went across the paper and did their tessellation. So I think you have the idea. I just had grabbed several examples. And then sometimes you just never know. This one reminds me of one of Escher's that he does, he calls Faces and Vases. So you'll notice when they cut it out and they did the translation, this time cut out a piece on the right, slid it across to line it up on the left, and also cut a piece from the top and slid it down to the bottom, and then went, you know what, this looks like some faces. So the student then went and started tracing them into various faces by rotating. Ultimately ended up with, not quite finished, but definitely showed me they understood the concept of all of these faces. So here it is in the corner, and then just working their way across. This student decided to go diagonally, but still showing the translation. All right. And I think that's a pretty good sampling. I have a few others behind me, but I think you have the idea of how much fun you can have with tessellations. They can be geometric shapes, but you can also have them become any sort of figure just to show the idea of covering the entire plane. So that takes us to the end of chapter 13, and I hope this has been helpful. So until next time, have a good day.